Dr. Gavin Ortlund is my favorite Protestant YouTube content creator. He is a man of integrity, honesty, charity, ecumenism. I believe that out of all the Protestants in the public sphere that I know of, he is bar none the best when it comes to apologetics and theology. I have the utmost respect for him, okay? And I see a lot of respect from other Catholic YouTube content creators or those in the public sphere. But however, I do see a lot of non-Protestants or Catholics and Eastern Orthodox using polemical tactics towards him. And I find it very appalling, just based solely on the character of Gavin Ortlund, okay? Because he deserves better. He's a Christian. He's made in the image of God, just like you and I. And I'm going to react to a video of his on who the rock is in Matthew 16 in light of St. Augustine. And I'm going to be as charitable and ecumenical as I can be. But you guys got to realize something. We're Christians here. We're all Christians. And this is not indifferentism, okay? Or compromise. This is just called, we're trying to follow our conscience to reach a consensus of truth in love. So I read one of the comments on his video that I'm going to be reacting today. And I'm paraphrasing, but it was something to the effect of, Gavin, you know, your charity and ecumenism is just a smoke screen for hiding the real truth. And then I saw a bunch of other Catholics ripping into him. So, Gavin, I apologize on behalf of the Catholic Church. You deserve a lot better. And it's just unfortunate that we have all these polemicists. I guess they call them trolls. I don't know. I don't call them trolls. Whatever. That's just cliche. But yeah, I just wish there was more love and ecumenism that went around in Christianity. So, again, I'm going to try my best to be ecumenical in this reaction. There are a lot of truths that Dr. Gavin Ortlund says, and I'm going to disagree with some of the stuff that he says, obviously. But my purpose in this is just to kind of give him some food for thought and maybe his viewers some food for thought in the most polite manner I can. Okay? So I'm going to start it. It's 11 minutes and 44 seconds. It's titled Augustine on the Rock of Matthew 16. This will surprise you. And we're going to have fun with this. And yeah.
Perhaps the most important biblical passage that comes up in discussions about the papacy is Matthew 16, where Jesus says to Peter, "You are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church." He gives him keys for binding and loosing. You can read through this on the screen. Now, there's so much in this passage we could work through. Libraries have been written about this important text. But one question we can pose is this: is Peter being singled out here, or is Peter being given responsibilities that he ultimately shares with the rest of the apostles? You might say Peter exclusively versus Peter representatively. Okay.
Now, he's going to say it's a distinction, which, okay, I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt, okay, because you can make distinctions. However, to me, it seems like, why can't he be both, right? Why is he not being singled out, and why is he not sharing the authority with the other apostles? Why can't he have this unique authority, right, of stewardship over the other apostles, but in the same manner represent and share that authority with the other apostles? Why does it have to be either or? Again, I'm not saying he's saying it's either or it's a dichotomy. That's an impression that I'm getting, and maybe he could clarify on that.
Okay, those aren't even the only options, but that's one distinction we can draw attention to and kind of work through a little bit in this video. And the reason that's not a stubborn question or something like that, the reason that's a natural question that's totally fair to ask is threefold. First, the responsibilities that are mentioned here in Matthew 16, the binding and loosing, references to earth and heaven, are reiterated to all the disciples just 2 chapters later in Matthew 18:18. So that...
Okay, I don't know if I cut him off too quickly there. So in Matthew 16, right, 16 through 19, Peter's given this authority to bind and to loose, right? And likewise, in Matthew 18, verse 18, all of the apostles, even Judas, just want to say, are given the same authority in terms of the wording or the etymology of it, let's say. Okay. And I'm not saying Gavin's doing this, Dr. Ortlund, rather. I don't know. I'm sure he's fine with Gavin, but I don't know if he's doing this. But what Protestants like to do to try to undermine that unique authority that Jesus singularly gave to Peter is to go to Matthew 18 and say, well, look, all the apostles over here can bind and loose. Well, that makes them on the same level as Peter, because Peter is binding and loosing over in Matthew 16. But if you notice in Matthew 18, the whole context of Matthew 18, right, is church discipline. I mean, just read it. It's about church discipline, taking sinners to the church. And if they won't hear the church, you excommunicate them, treat them like a Gentile or tax collector. That's excommunication. So it's in that sense that they're binding and loosing. So it's a subordinate derivative of St. Peter's unique authority that Christ gave Peter alone, right? So like in the beginning of his video, is Peter being singled out, or is he just a representative that shares the same equal authority? Well, it's both, but the authority is not equal, okay? Because if you just read Matthew 18, okay, you will notice that this has nothing to do with building a church, right? Or giving keys to anybody. That's in Matthew 16, not Matthew 18. Okay, so you can't just go over here and simply because there's these words of binding and loosing that it's the exact same underlying principle substance as in Matthew 16. Does that make sense? Okay, because all the apostles were given authority to do a lot of things, and it's subordinate to Peter in Matthew 16, right? He has the keys. Nobody else has the keys. We're going to get into St. Augustine in a little bit here, and I'll share some stuff with you that he didn't, but let's just continue.
Raises the question here. It's like, okay, wait a second. Is it just Peter or is it all the disciples? And that seems true with the broader New Testament, where you get, the responsibilities that seem to be envisioned here generally seem to be shared conjointly among the apostles, like in John 20.
Agreed. 100% agreed with what he just said there on the forgiveness of sins. Absolutely agreed.
Second reason is that Peter often is the spokesperson for the disciples. So even here in Matthew 16, for example, Peter is responding to Jesus' question in verse 15 that is put to all of the disciples. The word you in verse 15 is in the plural there. A third reason is that this comes right on the heels, not of Peter being given a specific office. He's already been a disciple for some time.
Okay. So I don't even think that's his main argument, the whole office, of the papacy and infallibility for that matter. He'll bring up Vatican I. But I do want to because remember, he hasn't gotten into St. Augustine yet, but he will, and he'll quote him, I think like maybe 4, maybe 5 times. But nonetheless, this is what St. Augustine has to say on the succession of St. Peter and the papacy. Okay. So this is in 412 AD. So he's getting close to his death. Not quite, but. So, quote, if the order of episcopal succession is to be considered, how much more surely, truly, and safely do we number them from Peter himself, to whom, as to one representing the whole church, the Lord said, upon this rock I will build my church. Peter was succeeded by Linus, Linus by Clement, Clement by Anacletus or Cletus, Anacletus by Evaristus. In this order of succession, a Donatist bishop is not to be found, end quote. Okay, so obviously he's writing against the Donatists' claim of true apostolic succession. But you can see from the quote here that Peter himself to whom as to the one representing the whole church. Okay, so just keep that in the back of your mind when he's talking about like the office or succession, because I think in the very end of his video, he brings up Karl Barth and how this succession is like this ethereal spiritual succession that every Christian has from St. Peter. Nonetheless, let's continue.
But rather on the heels of his confession of Christ's identity. So the context of this passage is is this confession that he makes. And so it raises the question here of what's the relationship between Peter's confession of Jesus in verses 16 and 17, you see there in blue, versus what you see in red, which is...
So Peter's confession is in verse 15, right? Or I'm sorry, 16 rather. Simon Peter replied, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." 17 on is Jesus. So I maybe he just made a little glitch error there, but really what's in red, I would think, would be 17 through 19. But I mean, I don't know what his intent here is, but yeah.
Jesus's confession to Peter, verses 18 and 19. So that doesn't resolve things, but it just makes the question fair. Is Peter being given a kind of unique supremacy here that ultimately puts him in authority over the other apostles in some sense? Or are the responsibilities being given to Peter here ultimately shared by the other apostles, so he's more like a first among equals? Is Peter the...
Again, it's kind of both. The first among equals, right? That's just like Eastern Orthodox echoing, or whatever you want to call it. I mean, in a sense, you could say he's first among equals when it comes to certain elements of just being a bishop. You know what I'm saying? But, if you don't have a supreme pontiff, if you don't have that steward, that universal steward, you're going to have division. You're going to have schisms. You're going to have autocephalous churches, right? It's just, I mean, look at the Eastern Orthodox, and that's not a bash towards them. But you need that central authority figure.
The boss or the first among equals? Is it Peter exclusively or Peter representatively or something else? Well, again, huge question, but one of the things we can do to try to get some traction is just look at how the church fathers and other generations of Christians prior to us worked through this. And so in this video, let's just work through Augustine's exegesis of this passage, and specifically this question, this exclusively versus representatively question with Matthew 16. Historically, there have been three proposals for how to understand the rock here. Sometimes it's seen as Christ, sometimes it's seen as Peter, sometimes it's seen as Peter's confession of Christ. But what we can recognize and what is widely recognized today is that these are not necessarily mutually exclusive. And in the early church, for example, you can find all three options are held, and a lot of times they're combined. So one of the common views is that it's the rock is Peter in his confession of Christ.
The rock is Peter in his confession of Christ. In my humble opinion, that's beautifully said. In my humble opinion, because the Catholic Church and the Catholic Catechism says the rock is his confession and Peter. It's both and. There's no dichotomy. There's no separation there. But so he, in kind of rewording it, said and reiterated just what the Catholic Church teaches, in a sense. Now, going back to the Church Fathers, he's absolutely right. Okay, I think St. John Chrysostom and St. Augustine, definitely had some difference of exegesis on who the rock is, okay, or what the rock is. You cannot dispute that, okay? But then it's ultimately, well, what does the church say and settle and dogmatize and stuff like that? So,
who is the rock?
Oh, the rock. So again, I agree with him. So he's bringing up the rock. Who is the rock? Christ. And I just, I want to give him some credit and benefit here. So the rock is Christ. I'm not talking about Matthew 16. I'm just talking in general, right? In the strict, absolute sense, the rock is Christ. Christ is everything, right? Anything that Peter is because of Christ, right? It's like a delegated sense if Peter is anything. So like if Peter is the rock in Matthew 16, it's because it's a kind of like a subordinated rock, vicariously, vicar, right? That's under the true rock, Christ, okay? But again, it's not an either or. It's not an either or. But again, it's my argument that the rock is strictly, in Matthew 16, the rock that Jesus is talking about is Peter, the person, okay? And we'll get into that later.
And this view is surprisingly common. I think this represents Augustine's mature view. we'll call it a representational view, and I'll unpack it and explain it. This is a little tricky because Augustine writes so much and he preaches so much, so you can find a lot of different things that he says about this passage throughout his career. But I think a fair approach is to look at his retractions, because this is going to give you his sort of final mature view of the matter. His retractions or reconsiderations are written around 426 or 427, somewhere in there. So this is at the very end of his life, the final years of his life. And there,
again, I don't want to get technical. Retractions is not a good English translation from the Latin. Reconsiderations or revisions or second thoughts, absolutely. So, and he said that. Okay. But his argument about, like, let's go to Augustine when he's 3 years away from his death, in his revisions that he wrote, and, like, let's just single that out against everything else he wrote on this subject, because everything else he wrote on this subject is overwhelmingly, talking about St. Peter's successor being the Pope, and we're supposed to be, and then the succession, and then we're supposed to be in submission to the Pope, and the infallibility of the Pope, and the rock is Peter, and all this, just mountains of it. And then just to go to his revisions 3 years prior to his death and just focus on that just seems, again, I'm not saying Dr. Gavin Ortlund is doing this, but it's kind of like cherry picking to support your own position. And we'll get into that, but he could have been senile. He had 3 years to go. I'm just kidding. The dude was 3 years away from his death. Okay. So, is he in his prime? I don't know. But again, when he's going through his revisions or second thoughts, you got to remember, guys, the substance of his writings, he's not changing that. He's just combing through his writings and his works and seeing, let me take a second look at this and see how I could have worded it better, or whatever, exegeted it better. I don't know. It's like if you were to write a paper or a thesis or a doctorate or whatever, a dissertation, and then 20 years later, you go and reread it and you're like, yeah, I would have said this instead of that. I would have done, you know what I mean? That's all it is. It's not that big of a deal, but I wouldn't just solely go to those reconsiderations 3 years before his death.
There he says, Peter, called after this rock, represented the person of the church, which is built upon this rock, and has received the keys of the kingdom of heaven. For thou art Peter, and not thou art the rock, was said to him. But the rock was Christ, in confessing whom, as also the whole church confesses, Simon was called Peter. So I'll leave this up for a second. You can see the logic here. First of all,
okay, so as you see it on the bottom, it says Augustine. It says retractions. It's okay, I'm not going to quibble over that, okay? Whatever. So he has this quote, and I have it too in front of me. Again, I'm not saying he did this deliberately, okay? I'm not saying he did this, but he left out this part right after this. So where it says, as also the whole church confesses Simon was called Peter, this is what St. Augustine says right after that. Which of these two interpretations is the more likely to be correct? Let the reader choose which of these two opinions is the more probable, and that refers to if the rock was Christ or Peter. So, you can't, I'm not going to say what his motive was, Gavin. I'm not going to say what his motive was, but to leave that part out, I don't know. It just seems like, not fishy. I don't know what the word is, but I wish you would have left that up there, because it's like to just leave this quote up there. It's, well, gosh, the rock must be Christ. You know what I mean? I don't know. So again, I'm not trying to read his mind.
The rock is Christ. You see that in red here. This is from 1 Corinthians 10, which is being quoted here. And then second, you see in blue, Peter confesses Christ, and therefore he is the rock in that confession. And that also explains the sentence there in the middle and the logic of this sentence that I put in purple. For thou art Peter, and not thou art the rock, was said to him. So the idea seems to be something like this. Christ is the rock. Peter confesses Christ. Therefore, Peter is the rock in that act of confessing the rock. It's like the greater rock and the lesser rock, or something like that. You have this interplay between Peter, confession, and Christ. It's not necessarily mutually exclusive.
I can sort of halfway agree with him in that, except the rock in Matthew 16, again, we're going to get to it. Okay, just hold on tightly. I can agree with what he said there. It's not equivocation. Okay, it's not. Some people probably think, oh, he's just equivocating between the two. He's not. Okay, he's subordinating Peter to Christ, which all of us should do, right? But in the context of Matthew 16, upon this rock I will build. Who is that rock? And we're going to get to that. But what he said is fine. It's orthodox. It's good.
You can maybe we can get some clarity and progress in understanding this if we look at some of his other language from earlier in his sermons. For example, you'll find Augustine speaking of Peter as rocky. He's rocky because he draws our
Rocky Balboa
attention to the rock. And if you read the lower parts of this that I put emboldened here, you can see he's really emphasizing in this sermon Peter's confession as that rock on which the church is built. So this further raises the question, okay, to what extent is Peter exclusively the rock then? And on that point, Augustine seems very clear. He thinks Peter is functioning in a representative role in this passage. It's not Peter exclusively, it's Peter representatively. And that from this same passage from the retractions, I put in red here so you can see that stated very explicitly twice. Peter represents the entire church in this act of confession. And
that's fine. But again, I'm not saying he's doing this. To put this he represents the church, and then he's, in charge of the church, whatever you want to say it. He's got that unique authority into this dichotomy, splitting those apart. Why can't you have both? You know what I'm saying? So he represents the church, obviously, as being the vicar of Christ. And this is what St. Augustine says in 411 AD. It says, quote, among these apostles, Peter alone almost everywhere deserved to represent the whole church. Because of that representation of the church, which only he bore, he deserved to hear, I will give to you the keys of the kingdom of heaven, end quote. So obviously you can see that this representation of Peter is given to him alone and to only him he bore, right? So that uniqueness is in that representation. Just the quote I just read you. It's right there. That's St. Augustine. Let's move on. But you can understand what I'm saying.
That's the case in some other passages in Augustine's writings as well. It's not Peter being singled out to the exclusion of the rest of the church. And that's why earlier in his sermons, Augustine can say things like this with reference to the keys given here in Matthew 16. Did Peter receive the keys and Paul not receive them? Did Peter receive them and John and James and the other apostles not receive them? What was given to Peter was given to the whole church. So this is broadly...
Okay, but also, this is what he also says. Quote, or are these keys not to be found in the church where sins are being forgiven every day? But because Peter symbolically stood for the church, what was given to him alone was given to the whole church. So Peter represented the church. The church is the body of Christ. What was given to him alone, right? Uniquely, firstly, was then shared and given in a derivative, subordinated sense to the whole church, just like I said about Matthew 18, verse 18. Okay? That's St. Augustine. So, again, I'm not saying he's choosing select quotes from him, but you gotta balance it out, and you gotta look at his other quotes and do some study on what lines up correctly.
The view of Matthew 16 that I think is most sensible. It's a tough passage, but this is probably how I would take it, that Peter is the rock in this act of confessing Christ, in the apostolic confession of Christ. Not as the first holder of an ongoing office to the exclusion of the rest of the church or something like that. Now, one strength to this idea is that it is able to sort of just fit with the rest of the New Testament. This is my basic approach to Matthew 16, is I say, look, here's a tough passage. Rather than put all the weight on this one passage to do something unique, let's just read it in line with the rest of the New Testament, because you have the same imagery all throughout the New Testament. And consistently, Christ is called the rock or the cornerstone on which the church is built. We've already seen 1 Corinthians 10 quoted by Augustine, and you have this image.
Sorry, I wanted to go back. So St. Paul, the rock was Christ. So remember the Israelites and Moses getting the water out of the rock. So St. Paul's saying that was a type. That was allegorically Christ, right? Again, right. But so if that rock is Christ, that means he's the rock in Matthew 16. You know, like, again, I'm not saying he's doing this, but I'm not saying he's doing this, but Protestants like to justify their position by going to completely different contexts that have perhaps the same words on the surface, right? The same letter of the law, the same words, and then just take those and like make them equal or synonymous with the wording in Matthew 16 or whatever, text you're dealing with. There can be equivocation in that. Words have multiple meanings, right? Words have multiple meanings. Etymologically, wow, say that 10 times fast. I'm sober, I promise. But yeah, so like you can't just say, oh, Christ is the rock in this verse, and then go back to Matthew 16 and say, well, he's got to be the rock because he was the rock over here. You know what I mean? I don't care for those hermeneutics. It can work if the word, again, you got to go to the original language, and I don't know Koine Greek. Again, there's a lot of Aramaic in the New Testament. Just saying, there is. But yeah, you got to be faithful, though, to the true meaning, to the spirit of the context and what these words actually mean in their context. Okay.
From Psalm 118 about Christ as the stone of stumbling and rock of offense. This is from this language about the stone that the builders rejected becoming the cornerstone. And then at times in the New Testament, you have the apostles participating in that imagery. Sometimes all of the apostles, as in Ephesians 2:20, sometimes certain of the apostles, as in Galatians 2:9, with sort of the inner three of James and Peter.
All right. You ready? When James and Cephas and John, who seemed to be pillars, perceived the grace that was given to me. Why does it not say Peter? Why Cephas? Why does St. Paul, I could be wrong on this, I'm just kind of shooting from the hip here. Why does St. Paul call him, why is the transliteration in his letters when he's referring to Peter, Cephas, like 8 times? Why in John 1:42 does Christ have, or use the name Cephas, right? It's because it's anglicized and transliterated from the Aramaic, not the Greek. It's not. If it was from the Greek, it'd say Peter, right? It's anglicized and transliterated from the Aramaic. That's why it's Cephas and not Peter. And St. Peter repeatedly uses the name Cephas. I went to go and visit Cephas for, was it 14 days? I can't remember, in Galatians. So what's the point, right? Who cares? Well, I mean, again, he doesn't get into the, Koine Greek argument of who's the rock, but Jesus spoke Galilean Aramaic. He did not speak Greek to his apostles, okay? He did not. Now, the book of Matthew, or the Gospel of Matthew, rather, most scholars, 90 Protestant, Orthodox, Catholics, claim that the Gospel of Matthew was written in Aramaic and then eventually translated into Koine Greek, right? I mean, we have the Koine Greek. We don't have the Aramaic. But in the Koine Greek, when Jesus says, and you are Kepha, and on this Kepha I will build my church. Again, we're going to get more into the passage in a little bit here, but I just want you to know that why that Cephas is there. It's to go back to alluding to the rock of the Aramaic. Okay? And that unique authority that was given to him. All right. Sorry, I kind of rambled on.
And John. So there seems to be a tension here between Augustine's way of thinking about the passage and what you'll find, for example, at Vatican I, and the way this passage is used as a sort of proof text for a primacy of jurisdiction being given immediately and directly to Peter by Christ. One of the reasons that this...
Ooh, okay. So let's just bring up Vatican I, okay? Because he just posted a whole slide. I couldn't even read it. You know, what part of Vatican I? Well, obviously it was on St. Peter and the successors and the papacy and infallibility, but this is what Vatican I says. This is such a huge point, at least to me. It says, quote, "You are Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church. Cannot fail of its effect. The words spoken are confirmed by their consequences," end quote. What does that mean? The words spoken are confirmed by their consequences. Think about this, right? Eastern Orthodox and Protestants can argue all day about Matthew 16 or all day about the legitimacy of the papacy and papal infallibility. Exegete here, exegete there, council of this council and that council or whatever. Look at the consequences in the last 2,000 years. The Catholic Church, established and built on Peter in the first century, is still here, and we have a lineage of succession going back to St. Peter of 265 popes. I mean, that's just a fact. That's not a claim or whatever. That's a fact. And look at all the heresy that we've defeated. Look at all the saints that our church has made, in spite of all the scandals and all the baloney and just everything in the past 2,000 years. Those words spoken in Matthew 16, "You are Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell will not prevail." Those words are confirmed by the fact that our church is universally here and has been since St. Peter. Okay? If you want to say otherwise, well, you tell me who the first pope was. And then we can get in a really fun and interesting conversation. Because we can literally trace our lineage. Not only that, but also our other bishops can trace their lineage back to the original apostles. Eastern Orthodox can, St. Bartholomew. Okay. He brought up Vatican I, so I just wanted to bring that up. Just look at the history and the physical manifestations that we have today going back through history.
This is significant is that Augustine is not eccentric in this. This is a common way of thinking in the patristic era. Edmund Hill, who's a well-known translator of Augustine, has a note on this passage where he talks about the great Petrine texts. So that includes like at the end of John and at the end of Luke, where Peter's given a commission, being interpreted in this representational manner by practically all the fathers before Leo the Great. Now, I don't have enough knowledge to verify whether that's correct or not.
For Augustine, following Cyprian, and indeed in agreement with practically all the fathers before Leo the Great, a generation later, Jesus chooses one man, Peter, to represent the church in the great Petrine text. In order to stress the unity of the church, they did not interpret these texts as giving Peter a primacy of authority over the other apostles, which would be inherited by the Bishop of Rome, the Pope. For St. Augustine, come on, put the saint in there. St. Peter represents the faith and unity of the universal church, not the special place in this church of the local Roman church and its bishop. That sounds Eastern Orthodox to me, but represents the faith and unity of the universal church, not the special place. I don't really understand this. Maybe he'll elaborate on this. The argument is that in the patristic age, in the ante-Nicene age, and following, because he says Augustine, right? Yeah. all the fathers were in agreement that Peter did not have a special place of the local Roman church and its bishop. What is it even? It's just worded poorly. They did not interpret these texts as giving Peter primacy of authority over the other apostles. Well, you got to quote some fathers here then. You know what I'm saying? What is this? This just seems like a claim of out of whole cloth, really. I don't know what he's talking about.
But Ed Szycinski,
not Gavin, the quote,
who's a great scholar as well, comes to a similar conclusion. He says, with few exceptions, patristic exegesis of Matthew 16 had nothing to do with the existence of an ongoing Petrine ministry in the church.
I quoted you way before St. Augustine, and even lists the Petrine ministry of succession. Linus Cletus, Clement, so on and so forth. I don't know who these guys are that he's quoted. I have never heard of them, but it's just, I don't know.
So in other words, Augustine is not completely way out in left field here. Now, my goal is not necessarily to settle this or say everyone has to agree with Augustine, but more actually to just put out categories for the interpretation of this passage. Because I find a lot of times people approach this more simply, thinking, well, if the rock is Peter, that supports the Roman Catholic view, and if the rock is Christ, that supports the Protestant view or the Eastern Orthodox view or something like this.
Yeah, I don't know about that one. That seems weird because, as you know, a lot of church fathers wrote about this passage and said that the rock was Christ. The rock was his confession, as he just demonstrated with St. Augustine. But again, we can in a sense accept all those, even though I personally accept one of those. We can accept the fact that it's on his confession too that he built his church. You know what I'm saying? That's okay. But you got to think, well, on his confession, so Jesus just built it on the abstract confession that was heard audibly. You know what I mean? The confession is Peter. It's a part of him. You can't separate a confession that belonged to him from him as a person. But yeah, I don't know how I feel about that. If the rock is Peter, we're Catholic. If the rock is Christ, then Eastern Orthodox and Protestant. So then why aren't Eastern Orthodox and Protestants getting together? I know it's a non sequitur, but still.
But the reality is Protestants can speak of even a kind of Petrine succession. Okay? When Origen says, be a rock like Peter. Okay? So again, trying to put out categories like this. Let me try to explain. So now just to finish off here, pivoting from this specific exegetical question with Matthew 16, to try to, again, put out categories for how Protestants think about not just apostolic succession, but even a kind of Petrine succession. Here's how Karl Barth puts it. He's talking about the Roman Catholic conception of apostolicity. And he says the difference between the evangelical view and the Roman Catholic view is not in respect of the that, but the how. The protest of Protestantism in this question of succession is directed solely and simply against the fact that the you are Peter, etc., is mechanically transferred over Peter's head to every succeeding Roman bishop as a second, third, and 100th Peter, as if the succession and tradition of the Peter of Matthew 16, to whom flesh and blood had not revealed such things, could be related to any succession but a spiritual one, or as if, being spiritual, it could be tied to the secular circumstance of a list of bishops of this kind.
Okay, that's from Karl Barth. Okay, so I love Gavin. I respect him tremendously. So this is not... So I'm going to kind of... Gen Z. I'm going to dunk on this. All those Gen Z guys. I don't know. I'm learning the lingo, guys. But so this is not an attack against Gavin. Okay. So I'm going to attack this quote, and by extension, it's really attacking Gavin. No, not at all. But this quote or this passage from Karl Barth is just ridiculous. It's ignorant. There's no logic to it. It's horrible hermeneutics based on you are Peter. So listen, this is what the passage says. You are Peter is mechanically transferred over Peter's head to every succeeding Roman bishop. So just basically saying you are Peter. That's where we get our right or authority for Petrine succession. So Linus, Cletus, Clement, so 2nd, 3rd, 100th Peter. As if the succession of the tradition of Peter of Matthew 16, to whom flesh and blood had not revealed such things, could be related to any succession but a spiritual one. So he's saying this succession is solely a spiritual one because of the revelation of the spiritual nature of the Father revealing to Peter that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of the living God. Oh boy. That has some Gnostic undertones. No offense. Sorry, I'm not trying to be patronizing here, but this is ridiculous. Or as if being spiritual could be tied to the secular circumstance of a list of bishop of this kind. So he's saying like, so basically everything's just derived from Matthew 16, not even 16 through, 20 or whatever, but just the whole, you are Petros? I thought it was Petros. Petros? Potato? I don't know. That's where we're deriving apostolic succession. No. The Gospel of Matthew does not give us apostolic succession or that pedigree and lineage of authority handed down. Jesus Christ established that, not these 3 words. Okay? And then, the whole like spiritual circumstance of a list of bishops of this kind, like, so all we need is just like a paper list of bishops to prove or substantiate or claim of Petrine succession. Oh boy. Remember what I said about Vatican I? Words spoken are confirmed by their consequences. So do we just merely have this list and then we're just like pretending that we have succession going back to St. Peter? No, we have evidence. Manifest evidence in every century of popes and what they ratified and what they did and didn't do and all this for 2,000 years. I loved a lot of this video of what Gavin said. He's smarter than I am. This to me though is, okay, I'm just going to bite my tongue, say a Hail Mary and just let it go. Okay? I'm just going to let it go.
Fine. The reason for the protest is that...
Oh, I'm sorry. So maybe... My bad. There's more to it. I'm so sorry.
In these circumstances, apostolicity necessarily ceases to be a divine gift and human task and becomes an assured human possession, that it is preeminently understood in a mechanically historical and legal way, that it no longer can be a norm which confronts the church with direction and judgment, that in contrast, it falls completely under the judgment of the church. That's what that Latin phrase means. The control of the 2nd or 3rd or 100th Peter.
Guys, if this is just merely some sort of human possession, those are his words, right? And is reduced only simply to a mechanically historical and legal way, then to heck with the Pope and the papacy and all of it. But that's not what it is. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know where he's getting this from. I don't. I don't know. He's attacking the succession because, he's bringing up the 2nd or the 3rd or the 100th Peter as it's some sort of like secularist or legalistic, succession on paper. And again, the authority of the Pope and the College of Bishops, right, come from Christ himself. That's it. I mean, that it comes from Christ himself. And it's the Holy Spirit that guides them for the last 2,000 years. So a lot of this, secular legalistic jargon and, undercutting the succession of St. Peter, there's no, I have no words. There's no substantiation for this. I guess it's kind of interesting. I don't know, but
Do you see what he's getting into here? He's talking about the nature of apostolicity. And he's saying apostolicity is not the kind of thing you can hand somebody on a sheet of paper and just, here it is, mechanical transfer. Here's the legal documents that show the list of bishops. They all laid hands and so on and so forth. Therefore, you're apostolic.
Agreed halfway. Okay, the laying on the hands is not just some sort of legalistic reduction to paper, like notarized thing that, that's where the authority comes from. The laying on hands goes back to St. Paul, Timothy and Titus, right? And again, which derives from the strict authority of Jesus Christ, right? The ordination of bishops is a sacrament, right? It's not just this legalistic, juridical, notarized paper trail, okay? I'm just like dumbfounded. I don't know what's going on here.
He's saying, no, apostolicity. Now, that list of bishops might be helpful to the end of apostolicity. That might be a structure that supports and helps you protect the gospel. But first and foremost, apostolicity is a matter of fidelity to the apostolic gospel, the Petrine confession of Jesus.
I have no problem with that. Again, I wouldn't use those exact words, but yeah, like Petrine authority, right? Apostolic authority, whatever you want to call it, right? Is fidelity to Christ. It's fidelity to his church, right? Absolutely. Like, to heck with the list of succession. I agree with them. We get rid of them. We don't need them. That's not what's important. I agree with them. Gosh, his heart and his head is in the right place. It is. It is.
And that must always stand above us and hold us accountable to it. We are never in possession of it. So that's a little bit of a Protestant view on these things. What do you think? Let me know in the comments.
All right. Not that you guys care, give a rip, but do you guys want me to just... I'm going to do this, okay? And maybe Gavin will watch this. I doubt it, okay? I'm like low-hanging fruit. But I just really quickly, so this is the end. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. So I'm going to read Matthew 16, 16 through 20, okay, out of the ESV. This is a Protestant translation. And I'm going to show you, okay, in my opinion, objectively why Peter is the rock, okay? And a little more what's going on here as why this is all about Peter. This whole passage is all about Peter, okay? Remember that, okay? So I'm going to read it. I'm going to point out some things. So, quote, Simon Peter replied, okay, Jesus says, who do people say that I am? Okay, you know that, okay. Simon Peter replied, you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. Okay, really quick. Is this the first time that an apostle confessed Jesus as being the Son of God? Were there any other times in the New Testament that this happened? Yeah. Nathaniel, remember the fig tree? Andrew in the boat. So why didn't Jesus change their names and build the church on them and give them the keys and, the binding and the loosing? Because in the sense that they use of the Son of God, it wasn't in that consubstantial with the Father, divine, begotten sense. It was like we are adopted sons of God. And Jesus knew that. Jesus knew that. Because the Father didn't reveal to Nathaniel and Andrew that this is the Christ, the Son of the living God, in the sense that he's a divine person. Okay, so there's that. And Jesus answered him, blessed are you. Okay, you. 7 times Jesus is going to say you. Jesus uses the second person personal pronoun 7 times, all referring to whom or pointing to whom? Peter. Here's probably the most important part of this passage that no one ever talks about. Christ says, blessed are you. Simon Bar-Jonah, blessed are you. Where where in the four Gospels did Jesus bless any other person in a single kind of individualistic manner? Anywhere. None. Now, Jesus blessed the little children, right? He said, blessed are those who do not see and believe, to Thomas, but he didn't bless Thomas. He spoke about blessed are those who mourn and, in the Beatitudes, right? And before he ascended into heaven, he blessed the apostles in general. So all in general. I'm saying, whom did Christ bless individually? Like Nathaniel, I bless you, or blessed are you, Nathaniel, or whomever. To my knowledge, it's only Peter. It's only Peter. The only other person, to my knowledge, that was blessed singularly, not by Christ, but just by somebody else, but nonetheless, blessed are you, is our Blessed Mother, right? Saint Elizabeth, and then the woman, blessed are you, who bore this. Yeah. So yeah, that's important. Now, blessing, what does it mean to be blessed, guys? Especially by God. Christ is God, right? A blessing is a singular grace, a singular privilege, conducing to eternal life. That is, when God blesses someone, it's a singular favor. He didn't bless Matthew in a single manner, or Thomas, or Bartholomew, James, Jude, Simon, John, right? So on. I forgot a couple in there. Thomas and Philip. He didn't. If you think I'm reading too much into that or putting too much emphasis on that, I'm sorry. But if you go back to Abraham and the way God blessed him and made a covenant with him and changed his name and made promises to him, your offspring will be as fruitful as the stars in the sky, all nations. Yeah, it's a pretty big deal. Anyways, so blessed are you, Simon Bar-Jonah. For flesh and blood has not revealed this to you. I'm just saying, I'm going to emphasize that because it's about Peter. You. But my Father who is in heaven. And I tell you. Okay, I think that's number 4 or number 3. You are Peter. I'm sorry. And on this rock I will build my church. Okay, so Jesus is building. Is Peter building? No. Is Andrew building? No. Who's building? Christ is building. Christ is the architect. Is he not? Now, yes, in other places, Christ is the rock. I get that. I get that hermeneutic. In this context, Christ is an architect building on something. He's building on a rock. It doesn't make sense for him to build on himself. You know what I mean? In that architect or builder or carpenter sense. He's building on something or someone. Okay? So maybe it is his confession. Who knows? Okay? But nonetheless. And the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. So there's the indefectibility and infallibility. Because if you don't have those two things, then the gates of hell will prevail against it. Just saying. I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven. Singular you. Or I'm sorry, second person personal you. He did not give the keys to the other apostles. I hear Catholics saying this all the time. Now, if you want to say that the apostles have a derivative, subordinated share in the power of the keys, fine. But he gave the Peters to Peter. I just, it's pretty straightforward there. Okay? I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven. Whatever you bind on earth shall be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven. Okay? You notice all the yous? Okay, how about this? How about all the ands? And you're thinking, oh my gosh, you are a grammatical nerd freak. What would this have to do anything? Notice all the ands. And I'll tell you why this is important. Okay, Simon Peter replied, you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. And Jesus said to him, blessed are you, Simon Bar-Jonah, for flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father who is in heaven. And I tell you, you are Peter, and on this rock. Why the ands? I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. I will give you the keys to the kingdom of heaven, and whatever you bind on earth shall be bound in heaven, and. See what's going on there? So, for instance, and I tell you are Peter, and on this rock. It doesn't say it, but I tell you, or but you are Peter, or you are Peter, but on this rock, or but on that rock. Grammatically, just with the yous and the ands, you're telling me that the rock is Christ. Now, one last thing, and we're done, I think. Whom did Jesus give the keys to? His confession or to Peter? That's not a dichotomy. I mean, it can't be both, right? How do you give keys to a confession? So he gave the confession to, yes, winner, winner, chicken dinner. He gave the keys to a person, Peter. Did Jesus change the name of a confession or of a person? A person. Do you see what's going on here? So our church allows for you to believe that the rock is the confession so far as it doesn't, dichotomize from Peter the person, right? But in my, with the Aramaic, right, and the transliterations and the grammar and the logic, how is the rock not Peter? And then just all the writings of the patristics and all of our councils. Read our councils, the regional ecumenical councils, and just how much emphasis is put on Peter, the single chair. Quoting Matthew, like Ephesus, Council of Ephesus talks about it. I don't have time to bring up all those quotes, but so yeah, I think that's it, guys. Gavin Ortlund is the man. Subscribe to his channel. Watch his stuff. He's a good guy. I know I'm a nobody. It's okay. Hey, I'm almost to 7,000 subscribers. I'm getting there. I think he's got 83,000. But how long has he been doing this? Subscribe to his channel. Pray for him. Pray for me. Be nice. Be charitable. If he is your enemy, he's not my enemy, but if he is your enemy, love him all the much more. And don't comment in his comment sections saying that his charity is a smokescreen for hiding the truth. That was the most ridiculous comment I've ever seen on YouTube. Well, when it comes to this kind of stuff. Okay, I'm out. Please like and subscribe. I love you guys. Pray for me. Praise be Jesus, Mary, now and forever.